Nearly 200 years ago, policing was built on 9 simple principles. Today, we're putting those principles to the test, asking if policing is broken and what needs to change to fix it. Welcome to the Double Crew podcast, where 2 ex-police officers crew up again for a shift of real and honest talk on policing and beyond. As always, our views are our own and based on experience and publicly available information. We are your hosts today. I'm Gavin.
And I'm Steve.
Well, Steve, this is the big one.
Yes.
This is the one I had at the back of my mind that, if we were going to do one, if you're going to condense and we're going to do one podcast, it was going to be on opinion of the police, and it was going to be on, is policing broken? So the fact that we've got to, what are we, episode 5?
Yes.
And we're
well,
here
we didn't
now.
want to be, we did consciously discuss that because we said we don't want to be a couple of ex-coppers moaning, putting down the system, saying it was better in our day and that kind of stuff. Because there's 1,000,001 coppers you can find out there that will do that. What we wanted to do is actually put what we've seen now to the test, and would Robert Peel recognise the police force now that he created or helped create?
Something that is often cited at the beginning of policing, it was certainly mentioned in my training, was what is policing? And there's an argument it wasn't Robert Peel that wrote these, but certainly they came out in his time, and they are the Peelian Principles of policing. And I thought what a really good way to start this would be to go through the principles, maybe one by one. Let's see how we go, because there's 9 of them. They're quite long, some of them quite long-winded.
Yeah.
But go through them and go back to the fundamentals of policing. Why was the police service or force, however you want to call it, conceived? It is. And on what principles? And do they uphold today? And should they be upheld today? So the Peel Principles, you can find out on the government website. Very helpfully, they put it up there, the definition of policing by consent. It was in 1829. These were written and issued to every police officer. And there's 9 of them.
I think the first thing to point out, just before we go into the principles, Gav, is just to point out that before this, what did people do? Do you know what the police did?
Well,
before there was a police and there was a problem, how did you get help?
Yeah, well, point 1 actually addresses that. The first Peelian principle, for policing is to prevent crime and disorder as an alternative to their repression by military force and severity of legal punishment. So that gives you a bit of a clue of what used to happen before.
Yeah. So basically, what you would have is you'd have the local magistrate. So if you could afford to pay the magistrate to have a case for you, they would hear your complaint about it. And normally the punishment was just hanging. So it was always hang 'em, or something really, really serious was the only thing they did.
Chop off a hand or something.
Yeah, so if you did something that was a crime, they'd do something horrific back to you to make sure you couldn't do crime again. That was it. But really, sort of, legal recourse was a preserve of the rich, and you relied on protection rackets and things like that. Gangsters would run the place, and you would pay them to protect you because there wasn't anything else like that. We didn't want an army on our streets, did we? We was a peaceful nation.
Yeah, I often have a vision of like yeomanry charging in, like someone coming back from being away and bringing their troops in to deal with this dissent, this disorder, etc. Now, obviously, the Peelian Principles came in following disorder. What was it? It was something Peterloo riots or something. I think it was. That. Yeah. Well, it was like the final, the straw that broke the camel's back, because there was disorder, and I think something like 18 people died. There was a cavalry charge. So you can you're thinking military, cavalry charge.
And you shouldn't be having a military police civilians, and that
exactly.
I think was the controversy. And I think that's why a really important thing is why the police wore blue. The police wore blue, but it was kind of still militaristic. It was still a tunic, but they wanted to make them stand out totally different to soldiers, so they went for the blue rather than the red of the army. And they were blue, and they wore the custodian hat, and they were designed to be seen. They are not a hidden force. They are a visible presence of policing to keep order.
It's interesting you mentioned hidden force as well, because at that time, if I've got my history right, the French had a police force out there, and the French, and it was, when British policing was coming in, and people were very skeptical of it because they were comparing it to the French model, and the French model was seen as a very successful, well-paid police force, but it also had this intelligence network, and they were worried that it directly affected citizens. Almost, I don't want to say Gestapo, but if you think of that kind of thing, they had a real hold over people, and the British looked at that and didn't want that over here. So there was a lot of skepticism around bringing policing in, which we'll come on to in the other principles. But certainly it was this idea, we don't want cavalry charges into crowds of people who are protesting in the streets. We don't want to use the military, which usually uses an iron fist to smash out any disorder anyway.
Bullets, yeah.
But, in modern day, it's bullets and so on. So that's number one. Number one's quite easy one to tackle, really.
So sorry, Gav, just to summarise on that. And so number one, I think the mission for the police to exist is to prevent crime and disorder as an alternative to using military in that. So we can both agree that Peel principle still stands. We don't have a military policing us in the streets, although we do toy with it, and we are getting close. When we started the police, we had Parva, you had a baton, and that was it. Now every officer's armed with a taser. You've got firearms officers available 24/7. You've got specialist units that carry firearms. You've got undercover units that carry firearms as well. Some of the tactics the police are starting to use, you could get a fag paper between them and the military. And when you look at things like COVID, how the police were used to enforce curfews and to enforce things like that, I mean, that is ordinarily the preserve of an army, to enforce a curfew on a people.
Yeah, I think on the point of curfews, we certainly did enforce curfews issued from courts and so on, and bail conditions that had. True. So you had tagged curfews and GPS tagging, all that sort of stuff. So there wasn't, but it wasn't society as a whole. These are individuals you're dealing with, right? So these are individuals who've been punished through a system, or they're on bail, and we had to police it, which is very different to saying the entire population of this town, you can't go out at 9 o'clock at night. Okay, so number two, the second Peelian principle, to recognise always that the power of the police to fulfil their functions and duties is dependent on public approval of their existence, actions and behaviour, and on their ability to secure and maintain public respect. So this is where we start, and there's a few others in here that are kind of very similar. We start to talk about how this policing by consent is required to have an effective police force. Or I say to have an effect, it wasn't tried and tested, so this was all new stuff at the time. But the idea was that you needed the respect of the people, and that was crucial. And to do that, you enlisted people from the people, and we'll talk about that. That's another one in a minute, because they are respected members of communities, etc. So you've got to fulfill their functions and duties dependent on public approval of their existence. Well, let's tackle that. Do we think, Steve, that the public approve of the police as a whole?
I think the public believe that a police force is required. I think you wouldn't find anyone who says there should be no police or no police force at all. We should just sort it out and fight it out in the street. So I can't see anybody that would argue that. So in the first thing, I say yes, there is public approval for it to exist. Now the controversy comes from the actions, behaviour, and the ability to maintain and secure public respect.
Right.
Personally, I believe the police have completely lost the plot recently, because they've gone from thinking that respect is something you can buy by going and dancing at parades, or is something that you can get by going to different, approaching different communities and trying to make everybody happy, going around to all these, we'd go to all the meetings, every social thing you can find. We're going to carnivals, parades, everything, all desperately trying to make the public like us. And I personally believe the police has forgotten that respect isn't the same as being liked. They are two different things. I know it's traditional and, it's that, but your father is someone you should love, respect, but be a little bit afraid of too. As a kid growing up, that is the perfect father figure. What is absent from a lot of homes now is that father figure, and that mentality is missing from policing now.
Right.
And
So you would argue that perhaps somewhere along the line, respect has been that kind of respect that would have traditionally been earned, has been lost for this
yeah,
police.
by
And
being a steady Eddie, by being present, by like a ticking clock. You used to have a police officer in your street. You'd see him get up in the morning, 9 o'clock. The police station would open. You'd see the bike riding round. You'd see him on his patrols. He'd be at the assemblies. You'd see him at the public fete. You'd see it would be the same guy, always there, reliable. He's always there. That becomes reassuring. You respect the fact that he's there, all weathers. Any problem in that village, he's always there. And over time, that member of the community becomes a pillar of the community, somebody they respect and trust.
do you earn respect by someone coming in from the outside who you don't know, who wears a uniform and effectively tells you can't do that? I don't think so. I think respect comes from somebody you know. You've known their history, you know their background, you've perhaps grown up in the community with them around. They're a known quantity, they're known to you, your family, etc. So that when you interact with them, it's almost like social media. This is the way I tend to think of it. On social media, you can hide behind your phone. You can hide behind a keyboard. Now, if you do that to someone's face, and you're going to see that same face again and again, and they're part of your life, they're part of a community, that's a very different model of policing. And I think we've lost that. And that respect that came with having someone as part of the community, who lived in the community, who policed the community, who was known to the community. And people talk about the clip round the ear and stuff, but what they knew more than anything is that my dad knows that copper.
Yeah, and if he knows who I am.
He knows who I am. He knows
the copper
who I am,
doesn't have
Steve.
to chase you. If your copper knows the village, he doesn't have to chase the criminals.
But you have that
because
respect.
I knew the village. I could look across the green and say, "Oh, that's little Alfie. I'll go and knock his dad up in a minute and tell him that I've caught the little bugger scrumping, or do whatever it is."
The problem we've got is we've eroded policing at the neighbourhood level to sufficient level, or lack of level, that people don't know who don't naturally know who their neighbourhood officers are. And I'm not talking about you can go online and put your postcode in and find out who your local officer is. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about is interacting with you in your community. You see them. Okay, you see them around. You see them out and about. Being part of a community is very much being present, is not being on a website, is not being, and I appreciate it's very hard, and we could waffle on about resources and so on. In an ideal world with infinite resources, everyone would have a neighbourhood officer in their street. Of course they would. But where I'm talking about with respect is that if you live in the community you police, there is consequence to your interaction with people on of that community on a daily basis. So if I'm a cop and I've nicked you, Steve, I don't know, put in a glass window in something in your drunken state or whatever, and I've arrested you for criminal damage, whatever. Okay, and I've got to see you next day in the pub, or I've got to see you next day walking the, that builds something. That means I'm not just going to I'm not going to nick you, treat you like an absolute sod and disappear and leave you thinking the police are the worst thing in the world. You're actually going to say, actually, I've got to live with this person, so we've got to get on somehow. And that the way you interact with people changes, and that respect is built on a mutual respect. It's not one way.
I think people understand you're there to do a job. And if you do your job professionally, they might be annoyed that they got nicked, or they might be annoyed that they did something wrong, but they won't take it out on you personally. I've got a great example I can bring up, actually.
I was going to give you one.
I've got a really good example. And this example is when I was a neighbourhood officer, and it's a great example of how you can have all the resources in the world, but neighbourhood policing always wins. Okay, and this guy, so there was a chap, I'd known him since he was about 12 or 13, about 18 now, and he was a local rogue, used to do a bit of drug dealing, bit of this, bit of that. He'd nick the odd thing. Anyway, I was due in to work at 8 a.m. in the morning. My mobile phone rings at 6 a.m., my job phone. So I answered it, and it's this guy, and he goes, Steve, I need help. I said, what have you done? And he said, "Oh, right, I'm being chased. They've got the helicopter up, and I've got police cars behind me now." I'm like, "You're in a pursuit with a helicopter over you?" And he went, "Yeah, yeah, and I don't want to give in to them because they'll beat me up when they get me." And I was like, "Okay, I don't think they're going to beat you up." And he said, "Yes, they will. Yes, they will. I don't." Anyway, so I was like, "Right." I said, "So what are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to dump the car and I'm going to hide." I said, all right. I said, well, do what you got to do. I said, you should hand yourself over to them, but if you're not going to, I will go into work early, get my car, and I'll come and get you. So anyway, I've gone to my now ex-wife and said, I've got to go into work early. Sorry, I've got to do this. Go in, get my little noddy car, and I drive all the way up, and I ring him and I say, right, where are you? And by this time, they'd cancelled. The pursuit had finished. It'd been about an hour and a half, and they'd lost him completely. They'd got the car, and everyone was sort of wrapping up for the night. And I go round and I give him a call and I say, right, where are you then? He said, oh, I'm over here. And I drive up and he jumps in the car and I say, how are you, mate? Oh, I'm not good. I've had to sleep in the woods and all this kind of stuff. And we go to McDonald's. I buy him a coffee in the drive-through and I said, right. I said, come on then, let's go to the police station. And yeah, and I called up on the radio and I went, control, one in custody, please. Can you put the suspect for that pursuit? I found him and I'll bring him in.
Yeah.
And what he said was, and I remember speaking to him in the car, and I said, why did you ring me? I said, why did you do that? He said, well, I knew you'd nick me. He said, and I knew you'd throw the book at me because I know what you're like. He
But
said,
I wanted you to do it.
I knew you'd treat me fair and you'd make sure no one treated me like crap. And he wanted me to arrest him because he knew I'd treat him fair. And I always remember that was a lesson. That was a story I learnt from the police, that you can still be firm, you can still maintain the rules and your principles, and respect will still come. You know, you can say no and people will still respect you. And he did.
It's funny, it's these interactions, I don't know where we've lost it down the line, but these interactions, I mean, that is a great example. And, you know, even smaller interactions than that, you've known this chap for quite a long time. I used to keep a packet of cigarettes on me because the first thing that anyone used to ask me when you put handcuffs on them is what?
Can I have a fag?
Can I have a smoke? Because you're suddenly taking the liberty, you take their hands away and you're like, can I have a smoke? And the act of me giving them a cigarette meant all of a sudden all this barrier's broken down. They're saying, well, hang on. Yeah, but they're more likely to be compliant. They're more likely to come in and talk to you in an interview.
Yes, Gavin, but in the name of health and safety, no smoking now. So what they do is they get drug addicts and people who are horrifically addicted to things. They take them into custody and suddenly they have to be Mormons. And they're not allowed to have a cigarette for maybe 12, 14, 16 hours.
I know.
Do you know how conducive that is to getting interviews and compliant prisoners when they've been deprived nicotine for 12 hours or 14
Well, this is it. I'm
hours?
not endorsing smoking, but what we're trying to say is that when you...
But we're not... When did we become nuns and monks? The police aren't there to be signals of virtue and paradigms of this, and we shouldn't speak, we shouldn't have a drink. We're not health fanatics.
No, exactly.
We are a police force. We are there. We have one simple job to do. We have a book of laws that have been passed by the people, and they have entrusted us to enforce those rules without fear or favour.
Yeah.
Go out and get them. What the hell are they thinking?
We were former cops, by the way. It's not we, because we often talk about we, and we have to clarify that. But right, so let's go on to point 3 then. Let's have a look. To recognise always that to secure and maintain the respect and approval of the public means also the securing of the willing cooperation of the public in the task of securing observance of laws. I mean, that is a mouthful. But I see what it's saying, basically, is that it's this consent. It's the public agreeing with you, effectively, that this is how they're going to be policed, right?
Yeah, I think what that point 3 is saying is that when a law is passed, we all agree to voluntarily stick to that rule because we've agreed as a people that this is a fair and right way, and it's gone through a process. So now we voluntarily will no longer steal from anyone, or we won't stab people because we agree. That is, I think you can wrap that up into a small thing. It's the social contract. That is the social contract. If we make a law, we agree to keep it,
And it's not
to
an
not break
individual.
it.
It's not an individual one, and that's really important to recognise here. Is you can't, as a member of the public, just so suddenly go on, stand up and go, "I withdraw my consent for you to arrest
No.
me. I
Yeah.
withdraw your consent to deal with me for this theft." It's about the common laws of the land, right? The laws that we've all, through democratic society, we've all voted for our MPs, who've lobbied in Parliament, acts have been passed, blah 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 blah. It's not the individual's power to go to a police force and say, "I'm revoking your rights." You have to do it as a collective. But the mechanism is there.
It
And
certainly
that's the
is. You can
important
vote.
thing.
You can vote, you can change
Yeah.
laws, you can appeal. And the other
If you
thing about
engage with it.
policing is brilliant as well, is there's a thing called case law. So even if there is a law that's been made, but you have a reasonable excuse and you go through it, sometimes they will say it becomes what you call a stated case, and that gives guidance to somebody like Gavin used to be a magistrate. It would give them guidance to, this happened once before and this is how it was dealt with.
Okay,
Yes.
so point 4 of Peelian Principle was to recognise always that the extent to which the cooperation of the public can be secured diminishes proportionately the necessity of the use of physical force and compulsion for achieving police objectives. Okay, so this is talking about public cooperating with the police, so force isn't needed. So with principle number 4, we thought we wouldn't spend as much time on this one because it really is covered by principles 6 and 7, which talk about physical force and the relationship the police have with the public. Both of those play into this. It's important that the police recognise if you don't have cooperation, the likelihood that you're going to use force or compulsion to achieve those police objectives increases. So we'll move on to the next one, but keep this in mind when we cover points 6 and point 7. So point 5, the penal principle, is a long one. So I'm going to put these principles up, but I'll start it off, but you can read the rest of it and we can condense it down. But it's to seek and preserve public favour, not by pandering to public opinion, but by constantly demonstrating absolutely impartial service to law, in complete independence of policy, and without regard to the justice or injustice of the substance of individual laws. And it goes on.
This is the fear or favour rule, that police should serve without fear or favour, basically, is what that's saying. So we serve the public, and the public want us to do that, but we don't do it by exactly what I was just saying to you. We shouldn't do. We shouldn't cater to individual groups, and we shouldn't be allowed to be lobbied, and we shouldn't be able to do, judge it on race or social standing or anything like that. What the police should do is, in good humour and treating everybody fairly, apply the rules. And it says clearly I'm looking at the old version, so I'm looking at the 1829 language. And it says here, without regard to justice or injustice of the substance of individual laws. So that means it doesn't matter whether you agree with the law or not as a police officer. That's not your job to decide whether you should or shouldn't apply this law, or whether this law is right. And we can all say, we can pull up in 10 seconds loads of examples where people are treated differently because of who they are and what community they come from. Okay, and that is the antithesis of what policing was for.
This is a hard point because it's very much, as you say, talking about policing with impartiality. Yeah. Okay, so you may not agree with the law, and I came up against this so many times in policing. I'll put it out there. Mobile phones, using mobile phones, right, while driving. Having this up against your ear and driving versus looking down and texting. I see a complete different distinction. How many times as a police officer you responding call did you have you had a radio? You're on the radio whilst driving. It's effectively like being on a mobile phone, right? I didn't have an issue personally
speeding
with mobile phones. I had an issue with texting, taking your eyes off that's when people got killed. It's when they look down on their text, or they're looking elsewhere. They're not looking on the road. But I had to enforce it. So I had a different opinion to...
Seatbelts are the same. Who other than yourself is affected by you not wearing a seatbelt?
Yeah, that's a
so
good
why
argument.
am I telling a grown man, like I'm giving him a £80 fine and whatever it was back in the day, for not wearing his seatbelt.
This is the thing, to try and illustrate. You might not agree, and quite often in policing, there are laws you don't agree with.
I gave seatbelt tickets out.
You gave out seatbelt, and I gave a mobile phone
matter.
ticket. And you had to. So that's what that talks about. So it's impartiality. The law has been made across the land for whatever reason. Maybe the reason's beyond you. Maybe it's it's public opinion driving it, and you don't have to necessarily agree with public opinion. But as a police officer, you enforce it.
And I'm sorry, Gav, I've got to add one extra thing in, okay, on this point, okay, and I'm going to call it out. Is when they put the LGBT rainbows onto police cars. Okay, I really object to that. Okay, not because I object to LGBT. I am a big fan of people who are in that community. However, what if I've been accused of being a homophobe and that car turns up on my driveway? Do I believe I'm going to get a absolutely impartial service in law when they have a rainbow flag that says LGBT Alliance or whatever all over it, and I've been accused of a homophobic crime? Okay, I would be crapping my pants. Okay, it would be the same as having an Islamic signal on the car saying we support Islam, and you're going to a report of Islamophobia turning up. You're not going to feel like you're going to get without fear or favour treatment. And the same reason we don't have England flags on the cars or Britain flags on the cars either, because we are impartial. We are there. Our job, we are the police. We are the police flag. We have a crown, we have a signal, we have a sign that is what for us is fucking massive on the middle of your custodian helmet. That is the shield.
Interesting you should mention that, because there's a new thing that was coming in. Certainly,
this is a controversial one, Gav. This is going to be a hot, spicy one. But I think it's worth saying.
Yeah, no, we'll mention it because you're right. Imagine if a judge went into court wearing something like that. Yeah, well, what it would do, it immediately makes you think they're not impartial. Yeah. They have regardless of whatever, regardless of what your thoughts are or your prejudices or whatever they are, if you are being judged by someone who clearly advertises their prejudice, which might be a positive prejudice and for good, okay, but they're prejudiced over an issue, or immediately you assume they're going to think this way because of what they're wearing, okay, that doesn't give you a fair trial. And that
Jeffrey Dahmer should expect fair treatment from a police officer.
Exactly.
Even though he killed men, tortured them, did all of that, it's not my job or our job to dish out justice. It is our job to process that criminal and get him to court so he never sees the light of day again. That's our job. And that's what we get paid to do, and that's what the public want, and that's what Robert Peel wanted.
So with impartiality, enforcing these laws to preserve public favour. Now, you can look at this two ways. Public favour, you can say, well, okay, we're going to preserve public favour by what? Us being favourable, and we're trying to sell ourselves. That's not what that means. We're not trying to sell ourselves to the public. What it means is that the public...
You'd rather have us than not.
Exactly that. Not, I rather, a supporter of Arsenal come up and deal with me. For point 5, it's basically without fear or favour and impartiality. So let's go on to number 6. Hopefully it's not so long. To use this is a good one, Steve. To use physical force only when the exercise of persuasion, advice and warning is found to be insufficient to obtain public cooperation to an extent to secure observance of law or to restore order, and to use only the minimum degree of physical force which is necessary on any particular occasion for achieving a police objective. Now, this is talking about reasonable force. This is talking about police using force in the exercise of their duty. But as a last resort, very clearly at the beginning of that, it talks about when advice and warnings have been found to be insufficient. Okay, let's boil it down to that training scenario. There was always that, that line of protesters, Just Stop Oil protesters, right? They've sat across the road, they block the road, and they're obstructing a public highway. In training, when I did my training, before Just Stop Oil, it would have been others back then, but they used to say, right, so you talk to them, you go through a very, very step-by-step process. You talk to them, and you get to that point. Do you remember this? Is there anything reasonably I can say or do?
Anything I can say, yeah, I do.
Yeah, that will make you move away from this highway and stop obstructing it. And then they say no, and then that's when you escalate it to the level of, okay, then I need to use some force. I need to grab this person to pull them out of the way to prevent this.
And they've superglued their hand to the floor.
And they superglue down to the floor. And then you've got all those issues to deal with.
And it's now frowned on to yank it off.
Yeah. But use of force is such a hot one, because we talked about point one, where about the militarized, this is an alternative to military. Well, military use force, right? That's what militaries do.
But they use lethal force.
They use lethal force. Okay, so the police are brought in to not use lethal force, right? But when you dress your officers up looking like tactical officers, when you make them look like effectively like an army, okay, you start to make, I think personally, you start to make the assumption that this person who's dealing with me, this police officer is going to use force at any opportunity. They've got stabbed, they're looking militant. And I think that's a problem, actually, for the police. Yeah, I get that people have to have stab vests. I mean, why couldn't Steve?
I don't even think they should have
but why can't they be covert? Why can't police officers who wear stab vests covertly?
I think the police are designed to look scary because the people wearing the uniform aren't.
But what this Peelian principle talks about, and I think the police have probably got this, actually. It's one of the areas, there's quite a few, I think there's quite a few areas that they haven't got it, but this one I think they've got it. And because they're scrutinised so much, they've got body cameras now, you've got members of everyone's got phones and stuff like that. This whole perception of, an officer's just going to punch you and put you in a police car or whatever, or clip you around, it's not correct. No. Officers have to justify their uses of force. They're on camera.
I think the biggest problems now with use of force are not individual officers. I think individual officers are scrutinised to the ends of the earth. What I think it is it's the public policy when dealing with big incidents or protests, and what the public see as unfair treatment is actually political decisions made by chief constables rather than the cops on the ground deciding whether to taser someone or not.
I think this is a very tried and tested area for police forces.
Yes,
actually.
I agree.
They do, if I look back to my training, I think one of the areas that a lot of time was spent on was reasonable use of force and how to do things without hurting people.
Well, that's an interesting thing with the army, because the army, I'm not sure if it's changed because I'm 10 years out of date now with the police, but when it comes to the army, your authorising officer, so your commanding officer, can say, shoot that man, and you can't be found guilty of it because you follow orders in the army. You are told what to do, you do it. You don't have to form any sort of mindset in your mind before you do it. Whereas police officers cannot be ordered by their commanding officer, or never used to be, to say arrest that man or do this thing. You still have that autonomy to make your own decisions, and I think that's another thing about the police to respect.
And knowing that if you got it wrong, you could be liable. That's the other thing as well. Police officers,
keeps you honest.
And I knew police officers who have been done for assault. It happens very rarely, but it does happen. But generally, I think they've got this right. The one thing I do think the police struggle with is that when there's an incident, and you talked about the airport incident, there's a snippet of CCTV or whatever it is that's shown by the press. You get a snapshot. You get 3 seconds. You don't get the 6 seconds before it, or the 30 seconds before it, or the 3 seconds. You don't get to see it in context, and context is absolutely everything.
That came out drip fed, didn't it? Because the first bit of that video that came out for the head thing was just the police officer kicking the man in the head, and it was like brutality. Look at this. He should lose his job, for a 3-second clip. And then when you watch back, you see this, what can only be described as
it's a horrific assault.
Clusterfuck. Horrific assaults towards those officers. In any other country, they've been shot dead on the spot, because it is an airport where people are terrified.
You've got terrorism, everything.
The fact is, those men are so lucky they were not shot dead. You know what I mean? Because they were basically putting the whole place in danger, whole airport, a highly sensitive, dangerous place, and they put everybody at risk.
And our officers would be armed, right? You have all this stuff as well. So you think about,
and they still showed restraint, even in that circumstance.
So I do think they've got it right.
6, we're doing good.
Yeah, okay, number 7. probably the one for me that resonates one of the most. To maintain at all times a relationship with the public that gives reality to historic tradition that the police are the public and the public are the police. The police being only members of the public who are paid to give full-time attention to duties which are incumbent on every citizen in the interests of community welfare and existence. The police are the public and the public are the police. Now, this is where, for me, policing, is it working at the moment? I don't think it is. And the reason I don't think it's working, and just on this specific point, is that the police aren't viewed as the public. The police are viewed as a police force. They've lost somewhere certainly in my career, I felt we were pretty much lost most of it. It was going that way anyway. Is that the police that you interact with as a member of the public, you don't know them. You don't know who they are. You don't know. They could be from another community. They can be from another. You don't know their background. You don't know anything about them. They're an anonymous, uniformed, tactically looking officer who's turned up to deal with your situation. Now, to me, that doesn't.
The case, maybe.
On one level, you could say, per se, the words, the public. Yes, the police are recruited from the public, but that's not enough for me. Community.
Well, even that, Gav. Even that, now with direct access and you've got to have a degree to get in there, into the police, now you're at a point where you're starting to cut out an awful lot of the public who don't have the ability to get a degree or beyond GCSE level education.
Yeah.
Anyone below that is no longer welcome, even though that was the traditional pool for policing.
See, I, like you, I was a tutor constable for many years, over 10 years, and I used to work on a professional development unit, was very much going down the academia route. I understand why they were doing it. They were trying to give officers something they could take away and say, oh, I've got a degree in this, whatever, and it could be used when they moved on, which I kind of understood. But what I didn't agree with was that it would preclude people who didn't fit that mould. If we are to get policing back on track in this country, if you like me think that in some way policing's fundamentally broken, then we need to get back to a situation where it's a member of your community. It's the person you knew. Oh, Dan, I went to school with Dan. And he's now a cop, and he now polices the local area. Everyone knows that. He's a good lad. Or Hannah. I grew up with Hannah. She's someone to look up to. And you have role models in society. And policing, I think, police officers used to be role models. I don't think they are anymore. Do you remember police houses?
Yep.
Right? So I joined. It was just on the tail end when people were selling off all the police houses, or people were buying their own police houses. Police houses where a police officer lived in a house in the village. In the village, they policed. They raised their
kids
family.
went to the same school as the other kids that are getting bullied, so the copper gets involved. There is a need for wham bam, thank you ma'am cops to come in, swoop, do the fast attacks, do the quick snatch grabs, all that kind of stuff. But the bedrock, the day-to-day policing of communities should be focused directly on the community itself.
And that is where you win it.
Spread out.
I used to have a saying when I was tutoring, because we all had a little patter, didn't we? Mine was saying, you need your butchers, bakers and candlestick makers, right?
Yes!
Because
I love that. I love that.
You can't have and I used to relate to this. I never forget, and I've got a little story that will help, and this is why I think neighbourhood policing is so important. I went up to enforce a drugs warrant in Tottenham. So I came from rural policing. So you take a rural cop. We didn't get the Met to do it. We went up there, and I get out the car, and I go do, and I walk over to the high-rise building, and this guy comes up to me, goes, "What are you doing?" And I went, "What do you mean what I'm doing?" Big smile on my face. He went, "You're hated round here. Why are you walking?" It says, "You stand there, someone will chuck something up out of the window at you from that high rise and probably try and kill you." And I went, and the whole dynamic changed. Now me and the other two officers like, ooh. So we go in, and we go up to this door. Long story short, we can't enforce the door. We can't get in. So we call out the local crew, and they come out in this armoured police riot van. These two guys over 6 foot, 6'4", 6'2", whatever between them. They come in and they're absolute meatheads. These guys. And they go up and they bosh the door in and basically turn around and say, "I would just search and get out of here," and then go and leave us to it. And I've never been so like, aware that I'm in a different community.
Yeah.
So, and this is where I come back to where this relates to it is that if you draw from your local community and you get your local community to police your local community,
Yeah.
they can relate. Well, I don't know what it's like to live and grow up in a council estate in Tottenham. I don't know. I didn't grow up in this area. So you need people who've grown up in that area to police that area because they'll get more respect. They'll be more effective.
I policed the area I lived. I literally policed the
did.
area I grew up as, and I was a better copper.
Yeah,
if you put me
100%.
anywhere else, I wasn't as good. I was just an average Joe. I did that. When I was there, I knew every alleyway. I used to play in the park and climb the trees and nick the stuff. Do you know what I mean? When I was a kid, you knew what people were up to because you grew up in that community.
So you're of the people, and that is so important. If we're going to radically change policing in this country, bring back the neighborhood cop, and I know that comes at a cost, but bring back that person that everybody knows.
Everybody based at headquarters should have to go out on patrol for 10 hours a month. And I think that should be without question. I think that they should be out on patrol because you cannot sit in an office for 5 years and not have made an arrest, not have dealt with the public, just write policy, just write
You think there's
status
a detachment?
plans. I think they become detached. And what happens is they go off to places like the College of Policing, which should be instantly closed down, in my opinion. Okay, it is not a good thing for us at all to have a college that does that. I think that they are moving towards a national police force, like in Kent.
Well, they are. It's called
Scotland.
the National Police Service, and it's on the cards. I mean, you can look at it now.
It's a huge mistake. Centralisation removes accountability. And what policing needs more of is transparency, accountability. You need the people who work in an area to live in the area. They need to also have the supervisors in that area, and they need to write policies that are specific to that area, because something that applies in Margate does not apply in Tottenham. Do you see what I mean? But you've got one college of policing dishing out how things should be done, and they're overcomplicating stuff, and they're making it so that you need a degree in order to be a police officer.
Do you know what gets me? It's these, because we follow a lot of the policing outlets, on social media and stuff. There's always like, we've done a neighbourhood initiative. We've sent a van out and we've sent 4 or 5 officers out into the locals, to do neighbourhood policing. That's not neighbourhood policing. That is not. That is a targeted operation.
That's a waste of time.
To me, neighbourhood policing is knowing your community, is being present with your community, being that officer that people come to, right?
Being the one who's getting chased by a helicopter and they ring you up.
Right,
yeah?
Exactly.
They ring you up. That's a neighbourhood police officer. That's what the public need. They need fair, even-minded people that are in their communities that are making them feel safe. The fear of crime is far beyond real crime. People are terrified of crime, but they're actually very unlikely to be a victim of it. More so now, slightly, possibly, but I don't really think it's much different.
Yeah, I say this quite often. The crime's there. Okay, crime's changed a bit because of the internet and everything else, but crime's there. It's just you're very much more aware of it. You've got social media. You get this feed constantly, right? Whereas before you have to buy a paper, right? You'd have to read a paper and find out a little bit about it. It's just so present that people are afraid, and we do have a fear in society. And what better person to allay your fears than the officer that you've known for 5 years? Of the people I've used to work with, the ones that when I joined were coming up to retirement, so they'd done their 30 years, they were going to get their nice police pension or whatever. None of them said to me, I can't think of a single person who said it was a disadvantage to police their own community.
No.
They all said that model of policing was brilliant, that worked. I'm not saying they didn't have their issues, because there is consequence to nicking someone in your community.
The flip side is you're open to bribery. And you're open to you play favourites and you do this and it becomes that, but that's where you have more than one officer that cover an area. So you
have correct supervision. You still have supervision and all that sort of stuff.
And employ the right people who don't want to do that. Do you know what I mean? That's the other thing. But I think, as I say, so I completely agree with your diagnosis, but I also think the public's sick too. I think the public are not doing their job, and we need to re-empower people rather than teach them that they're weak little lemmings. We should teach people. We used to do target hardening years ago, which was about advising people how to make their house less easy to burgle, and where to put lights, where to put this. But ultimately, these people who commit crimes in our community should be utterly shunned and shamed for committing a crime against their own people and hurting their own community, so that it's so disgusting to have done something like that, you won't do it again.
Put in the local stocks and have rotten veg thrown at them.
They should be shunned. They should be shunned. If you go and do something and burgle someone's house, then the public should shun you, and you should really feel like you've let the community down. But there's no shame anymore either. There's other things to factor into it. Like, each person is an industry in themselves. So you arrest somebody, that's your 10 hours of wages. So that's you good. You've earned your money out of that prisoner. Custody sergeant, detention officer. Next day you got Serco. They get a little bite because he funds that while they transfer them to court. Court staff get paid. Judiciary get paid. Then they go to prison. They then get kept in prison. It's like 30 to 40,000 a year, something like that, to keep them there. Then they come out. You've got the probation service. Then you've got the reintegration back into society programs, etc., etc. That one person probably keeps 25 people employed. Do you know what I mean? Once you start thinking about it. So if you remove the criminal and remove that, suddenly they don't need probation, they don't need this. So it's not necessarily in the interests of the powers that be to make anything better.
I'm going to push back on that a bit. I still believe that, we can talk all day about politicians and policymakers and things like that and what their agendas are. But I still believe inherently, as human beings,
they'll design themselves out of work.
Well, we want to stop wrongdoing inherently. I do. I think it's
so
still.
Why do they get? So then, why have they got rid of neighbourhood policing and got rid of all the things
I don't think
that you say that we need?
Money.
And
money.
So what's their motivation?
Money.
You could be right there.
It's cost saving.
You think it's just where they're taking the money away? Because I find it hard to see it as anything other than intentional. Because every copper I know knows the power of neighbourhood policing and why it's important, and localization, and looking at and knowing your people. You say it so passionately, yet why is that the first thing that they get rid of every time?
But they, I don't,
the chief constable, they cut.
But I don't think I think at the higher level of chief, you're having to interact politically. There's no two ways about it. You have to, in a way, as a chief constable, you have to be more political than as a policey on the ground, for sure. But I don't think there's an overarching.
Directs the police, doesn't it?
Well, they're going. And
Yes,
chief
thank God.
constables are, well, if these proposals come through, the crime commissioners are going to disappear, and chief constables will now be sackable again.
So I think that's a massive. I think that's a really good move. I think by having the PCCs, that's half of the problem, because they have to be elected, and I think it goes against the Peelian principles of having a political person as the person who decides who the chief constable is. I think the police should be independent and then should be held accountable by the government. That's how it was.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree.
But now you've got a politician who's right in bed with the chief constable. It doesn't sit right with me. It never did.
I agree with you. I think it's politicizing it. It's making it some sort of rally, like electoral rally to get this person. Chief constable should be accountable to Parliament. Absolutely.
But to the people, I would be okay with the chief constable being elected by the police officers. So they do they present the three candidates or whatever, and they poll the police officers. And they say, like, every police officer, whoever you are, gets a vote, and you get to decide.
Well, in a way they do, because going up through promotion, or it's always officers that are signing off on other officers to get up to a certain level. But you get other people involved higher up. In essence, that's the thing I think we've lost. I think we need representatives from the community. Now, don't get me wrong. There's cross-border crime. There's county line stuff. Yes, by all means have your CIA of policing. I know
that's the minimum. That's the 10%. It's the 90% that is affecting everybody. Do you know what I mean? And that's what they. It's not sexy. That's the problem. It's not sexy dealing with all of the neighbour disputes in the village. Yeah, that's not a sexy thing to do, but it fundamentally makes everybody's life better if you have stopped the two neighbours screaming and smashing each other's houses up, and that doesn't get any newspaper headlines.
No.
That doesn't get anything. It's not the same as we did a raid on this pub. It's not exciting.
No, but time and time again, it's been proven, hasn't it, that neighbour policing, like it's gamut. It's so much wider. It's like your terrorists. How much intelligence comes out? How much intel comes out of a neighbourhood? You might notice. I remember one sort of scenario where this person's putting their bins out at really weird times, like in the middle of the night at 4 o'clock in the morning, and the neighbour's seen it and everything. And this eventually unravels, and it leads to the fact you've got a suspected terrorist here active in the evening, because what they were doing was out of place, right? So if you don't have access into that to that intelligence, you're missing so much, and a neighboured officer can give that. A neighboured officer can say, "Oh, well, yeah, I know. There's a new person in the street. There's a new person who's moved into number 9." I used to work with a guy who, honestly, I could point at a house, 200 square mile patch. I could point at a house, and you pretty much have a good idea of who may have lived there. Like this guy, he had a memory for
really?
like he could tell you something about it or whatever. But that all that information, all that stuff is just gone. We've got these database systems that you can put a bit of information when you interact. That's not the same. It's not the same. You need a longer term approach. Okay, so Peelian Principle number 8. Are they doing this?
So what's this? The police should always direct their actions towards their functions and never appear to usurp the powers of the judiciary by avenging individuals or the state, or authoritatively judging guilt or punishing the guilty. So that's a long way of saying we're not Judge Dredd.
Exactly. Everyone thinks the same. You're not Judge Dredd. You're not Judge, Jury, and Executioner. I think we touched on this before, but I think this ties into that respect thing, right? If you, as the public, know that the officer who you've grown up with or is in your community, if you know them and that they're not the one trying you at court, you can have that separation. You can have that separation, and you can have it that you can understand their position is they've got to deal with this incident, but they're not the one or the system that's punishing you. They are just investigating, and they have a job to do. You
don't have to like. I don't believe you have to like somebody you respect. Do you?
No, not at all. Being liked helps. But it's not the be-all and end-all. I think you're not going to be liked by everyone.
I agree with you totally, but I think a police officer should not concern himself with being liked.
No.
I think a police officer should respect himself by being true, honest, and respectable. That's it. You present a respectable character
without fear or favour.
Without fear or favour. But I don't care whether you like me or not. Your judgment on whether you probably not going to like me if I'm arresting you. Why would you? But you will respect me because I'm treating you. I'm polite. I'm friendly, but not your friend, and I'm approachable, and I'm not going to do you any harm. But I'm certainly not going to do you any favours either. I am an impartial advocate of the law. It sounds horrible. It sounds so horrible to say it like that. But this is where we've come away from what the police is for, because if we concern ourselves with being liked, we will be careful what we say. We won't do the thing that's necessary because we know it will hurt someone's feelings. And we need to stop worrying about people's feelings. We need to do what the law tells us to do.
Absolutely. And there is another side to this as well, because there's also an interaction you need to have that earns that respect as well.
I think earn it back, Gav. I think we've got to earn it back. The reason they've lost the respect is because of themselves. I think that their vetting procedures, we let some awful people into the police, and nobody acknowledges it. They never just say we fucked up. We employed Sarah Everard's killer, Wayne Cousins. We employed him. He was a bad dude. We're sorry. He got through the net. We don't know how he got through the net. We're going to try and learn from it. We know it doesn't fix this problem, but we're sorry. We're as angry as you are because we are the public and you are the public too, and we're outraged that this happened. There's never an acceptance of that, and that's why the public lose respect for the police, I think, because if you owned up to your mistakes, you know what, at Hillsborough we completely fucked up. All those people died there. It shouldn't have happened. It never happened before. Gone wrong. There's so many lessons to learn from this, but instead they drag it through court for years and years and years and make all of those people fail. The Stephen Lawrence case, that was a really, highlighted that the police were causing problems, but it's gone crazy and far overcorrected to the point that there's no stop and search anymore because they're so terrified of getting into trouble with it and not being liked by the public for doing searches. And it's not popular. You're not going to win any popularity competitions being a cop.
It's a tough one because it's so easy just to sit and say you can't be you mustn't be political. You shouldn't really care if you liked or not. But you got humans right behind this. So if this person did like me, then that would make that interaction so much easier.
Oh
right?
yeah, definitely.
Of course it would, wouldn't it? So, but you shouldn't go out your way. You've still got a job to do. You can't on the one hand say oh, I want you to like me, but by the way, I'm going to arrest you for something you've done.
And it's that fine line, isn't it? Because like that guy, I went and picked him up, but if I'd have been the week before having tea in his house and chatting with him, or I popped round for a barbecue and stuff, then you're crossing a fine line. Do you know what I mean? Between that, so I always used to like that. I'm friendly, but we're not friends.
Do it'd be lovely to hear from an older neighbourhood cop who lived in their village, whose kids did interact with the other kids, who they did interact in that environment, and you had with people you'd arrested, because you are going to have friends in your community. And you are going to have enemies in your community. If you're an officer and you're policing your community, you're going to be, you're going to see your community again. You're going to police them differently. You're probably going to talk to Joe Bloggs, with a bit more respect.
You're not going to go straight to violence. You're going to take more time.
You're not going to jump on them,
it.
shove them in the van, and then take them to custody, and then you never see them again. You become more accountable. And I'm all for officers being accountable to their local community, and also the community being accountable to the officer as well, because they've got a job to do that you're all in together, which is what policing is all about. So what would I change? I would bring back neighbourhood policing, bring back local knowledge. When I joined, we still had area control rooms. And for those who are listening don't know what that is, basically at the police station for the local town, they have the control. They took the calls, okay, and then they resourced the officers at a local level. I mean, this sounds bizarre, but this is what they did. I would walk in at the beginning of my shift, and a police officer who's taken a call, you would have some civilians there as well, but who has taken a call, has said, oh, so-and-so has called in. I know him. I've nicked him loads of times. He's probably fled off to his mate's house down the road, at so-and-so. Bang. So I come in, I'm armed with the intelligence. Can you go to that call, Gav? And I go straight to that house. Bang. And guess what? I find him.
But the copper wouldn't send you to crap either. That officer would have got rid of 10 other calls. Right? So what the police do now is they spend so much time going to dross rubbish, whereas you used to have a screen for all of that stuff. We've got it arse about face. We should have the most experienced officers should be the ones at the coalface, because they can then screen out everything that's not relevant. And you should have these officers who really have got 10 years experience, know it inside out, got that. You would become so much more efficient. But what you do is you send the probationers to every call.
Even worse, Steve, you now have checklists. You're not, bring back the autonomy. This goes hand in hand with officers having more of a say in what they do, right? Again, over the time of the 15 years I was in, there was an erosion of my autonomy. I remember being able to go to a call, cliche, punch up outside a pub. One person's hit the other. Yep. I've got turned up. I go, right.
You prosecute, he prosecutes, you both get nicked. Or you can both go home.
Boom. Actually, they've sorted it out. It's gone. That's done and dusted. It wasn't even a crime. It was a no crime.
Since Jesus. That's how it's been.
So that was a no crime, right? Yeah. So what's happened now is that automatically becomes a crime report.
Yeah, I'm afraid.
Then you have to find it. Then the police are, incumbent on the police to detect it. And what I mean by detect it is solve the crime. And if you solve the crime, you've got to deal with the offender. Blah 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 blah. All that police work for something that a local copper could have dealt with, and it was done. And actually,
so is there not enough money or not enough police, or is there a job that's impossible? It's an impossible task they have now, Gav.
Yeah. Here's a question for you then. And we need to get on to point 9 in a minute.
Yeah.
But do you think a neighbourhood officer living in their community is going to be safer than an officer, a response officer, who is not part of the community, who just turns up and deals with the call?
Ooh. I think there's risks with both. Yeah, because there are going to be nutters and people who want to do you harm, and if they know where you live and know what you look like and know where your family are.
That's the pushback. That's always a pushback of,
Yeah.
I wouldn't want no people to know where I live, right?
I know, but for me, I tough is what I think, because ultimately you can get protection, you can get support, you can get that, and that is the job that you took on.
Right.
Okay? You took on that responsibility. You understand that. The same as if you're a soldier and you go off to war, you know you might get PTSD. Yeah, it's not something you want. It's not something that you have. It's something that happens as a result of your chosen profession. If you don't like it, don't do it.
Right.
Yeah?
And also, I would argue you're actually going to be safer
I
because
think
it's
safer,
harder. Look at it at the basic level. It's easy to swear, scream, and shout at someone you're not going to see tomorrow. It's much harder to be like that to someone who's going to be in your life for the next 2-3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're going to see him time and time again. You're going to start affording them a bit more respect and an understanding between you. And I think that's what I think. It's
the
bizarrely,
definition.
I
It's the
think you're
definition
safer.
of lose. It's the definition of you might win a battle, but you lose the war, because those people come in, they do battle, they leave, and they don't have to worry about it. But if you take that attitude where I'm going to give it all in this battle, but you've got to have this isn't the last time your paths are going to cross. You then know that that's it forevermore. They'll never trust you again. They'll never think that you're somebody they can take your word. You've burned that bridge and there's no going back.
Well, look at the guy you nicked who you knew. He's less likely to punch you in the face than he is a police officer he doesn't know.
I didn't even cuff him. Didn't need to. I didn't need to cuff him. I had no indication that he was going to do any violence to me. He sat having I think we got him a hot chocolate. He had a hot chocolate. I let him sit in the front of the car with me, and we bimbled in nice and steady, nice and calm, because that was the safer option. Do you know? Because and that was Peel principle. What was it? The police should use physical force to the extent necessary to secure observance of the law. Well, he submitted himself to arrest. He handed himself in to me. So,
but why did he do it? Because he knew you. He knew the type of person you were. He knew your temperament. He knew that's what he was going to get when he phoned you. He doesn't know the 10 officers that are chasing him. He hasn't got a clue of how they're going to respond to him. And I think this is where policing really needs to change.
But he apologised to me. That's the other thing as well. I forgot to say this. When we got to the station, we ended up getting him dealt with pretty quick, because it was just, they didn't really take it very far. I think he was driving without a licence, no insurance, the usual. And I gave him a lift home afterwards. Once he was booted out, I said, well, I might as well take you back. I'm going that way anyway. So I took him back, and he said, I'm sorry. He said, I'm sorry I did this. He said, I've brought all this shit down on your head. I didn't mean to do this, Steve, and I won't do it again. I won't, And he actually, for the first time ever, showed a little bit of sort of, my actions. You've really put yourself out, Steve. You came into work early. You've given me a lift home. He should hate me, but didn't. And I could see the conflict in him that he couldn't. And he had a terrible relationship with his father. He had and he saw in me somebody fatherly, perhaps. I kept an eye on him, I was disappointed with him.
And that empathy, right, it is missing. There's no empathy there. And I'm not saying to the officer that goes out there and gives a death message, there's no empathy. Of course there is, but it's not the same. I'm talking about empathy of someone's empathy that's built over years, empathy that's built over interactions with your community. I think you'd be safer, if I'm honest.
Well, I've got about 3 different people I know that were people I dealt with, arrested at least once a month for being idiots, drunk and disorderly, whatever. All 3 of them have died. One drowned, one had a seizure, and another one, I can't even remember how he went. I think he committed suicide. And I actually was sad for each one. Do you know what I mean? I thought, what a waste, and I've got memories of times that we had a laugh. Do you know what I mean? Because although some of the time I was fighting and getting them arrested and stuff, other times I was just called to a report of antisocial behaviour, and you'd end up sitting and chatting to them for an hour and having a laugh and saying, come on guys, you can't keep getting drunk here, I need to, and they'd go and move on, and you'd do that because you had that rapport with them. There were so many warm summer's evenings where I sat and chatted with them, you know, and then suddenly they're gone and died in a horrific way. I felt empathy for the people that nobody else cares about. And I think that's why I've functioned too.
I just think this is such a core principle that is being totally missed. It's being totally missed. And I'm not saying that there won't be some, chief constable out there who doesn't recognise that this is an area and hasn't got the budget to do it or whatever. But stop doing targeted patrols of neighbourhoods. That's not going to do it.
Good.
If you do it, don't call it neighbourhood policing, because it isn't. That isn't neighbourhood policing.
I think if you say the quickest things they could do to really sort of, I think, get back to a police that I would like. As I say, they've got a difficult job. It's moved on. I'm not trying to say that I've got the answers. I'm a pleb sat in my bedroom to giving my opinion, okay? But what I think is that they should move police officers into the control room, like you said. I think you should have some of the best people at dealing with jobs and dealing with crimes and knowledge should be the front line. They should be weeding it through and training the next generation of police officers how to be efficient at dealing with jobs and getting through them. AI, they should embrace AI technology, because it would mean everyone would get their phone call answered instantly. So if they could create an AI agent that could screen calls and get through and give the basic advice.
Use AI to get real people back onto the streets. However
and then
you
I'd
do
put
it.
all the real cops go on the street, and you have AI cops that answer the calls.
So we kind of, I don't really need to cover point 9 again because we've already done that, but the Peelian principle number 9 was to recognise always the test of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder and not the visible evidence of police action in dealing with them. And we've spoken about that, sometimes what you don't see is a good thing. Yeah. Because it means it's working. It's like politics. Sometimes politics being boring is a good thing. Because as soon as politics gets exciting, something acute or something bad could happen. Point 9 is a bit of a funny one because I think there is something to be said about public perception. If you see a police officer, it does reassure you. And if it in day and age, it might not. Yeah. but if you see your local neighbourhood cop walking down your street, it might reassure you, and that might actually prevent crime. But there's no statistics really for prevention of crime, is there? Okay, so end of episode 5 then, Steve. It's been a long one, but I'm going to condense it down. We've looked at the 9 Peelian principles. Does policing live up to them today? I'd say some it does. A lot of others it doesn't. Some. And we've got quite a bit to say on it. But it's not just about our say. We'd like to hear your say. So please do put something in the comments. We're ex-police, and I can't stress this enough. We can have that opinion outside of the organisations that we are in. Do say what you think needs to change, where the police are getting it wrong, where they're getting it right. It's important we all have a voice because nothing will change if we don't speak out.
And they can message us on our Facebook. They can click message and you can say, please keep this anonymous, but I'd like to say this.
Importantly, we do need your likes and your follows and your subscribing. Do interact with us to keep us going. And on that note, thank you very much and see you in the next one.
Thank you for joining us.
Bye-bye.